My name is Melanie Harper, 34 years old, currently living and working in Portland. 2 weeks after my mother's funeral, a cold ceremony just like my sister's gaze, I received a thick envelope embossed with a Charleston Law Office logo. Inside was an invitation to the will reading. No message, no phone call, no one had bothered to notify me beforehand. I held the envelope in my hands, my chest tightening with every beat. My name was handwritten on the front in neat script, Miss Melanie Harper, as if I were a guest at a family event I was never meant to attend. Why was I the only one kept in the dark? I remembered the funeral clearly. My sister, Vivian, handled everything, from the funeral home, the casket design, to the press release sent to the alumni associations where Mom once taught. I arrived exactly 5 minutes late due to a flight delay, and the moment I walked in, Vivian turned and looked at me like I was an intruder who had slipped past security. She hugged guests, gave speeches, and never gave me even one moment alone with Mom. When I tried to approach the casket and touch the cold hand I'd once held throughout childhood, Vivian stepped in front of me and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't ruin the atmosphere, Melanie. Mom's at peace now." That sentence sliced through me like a razor. After the service, I stood under the old oak tree near the cemetery, waiting for her to come talk to me. But she didn't. She walked past me like I was invisible. No questions, no embrace, no shared grief. And now, just 2 days before the will reading, I was finally informed by a soulless sheet of paper lying quietly on my apartment floor. I sat in silence for a long time. The old silk handkerchief my mom had given me when I started college, still tucked inside the drawer next to my chair. I pulled it out, ran my fingers along the edge, where her initials were embroidered. D.H.M. Dorothy Harper Miller. My mother's name. I folded it back carefully, stood up, and began to pack. If Vivian thought I would stay away so she could take center stage, she clearly underestimated me. As I drove into Mom's old estate in Charleston, the magnolia trees lining both sides of the road still gave off their sweet scent, but it no longer carried any warmth. The iron gate opened slowly, as if unsure it wanted to let me in. I parked in the back, near the gardener's shed, the same place I always parked during summer visits. The front entrance was reserved for Vivian and her important guests. Elise, the longtime housekeeper, opened the door. She cracked it slightly, her expression uneasy when she saw me. "You really came back." I nodded, offering no blame. Maybe she was under Vivian's pressure, too. Inside, the house looked unchanged, still smelled faintly of fresh lemon and lavender. Mom always liked things neat and tidy. But the feeling was different now. It didn't feel like home anymore. Before I could fully step in, I heard the sharp rhythm of heels down the hallway. Vivian appeared, looking like a catalog model for a high-end home furnishings brand. Cream silk dress, hair in a tight bun, deep red lips, holding a glass of white wine. "Oh, Melanie," she said, her voice a blend of mockery and fake surprise. "I thought you were too busy to make it." I held up the envelope, saying nothing. "Yes, an invitation. Just don't forget this is a will reading, not an open mic for feelings." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She turned away, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume in the air. I stepped into the living room. Eyes from distant relatives and family friends slid away from me. Only Uncle Raymond, Mom's younger brother, nodded at me from the corner. A silent acknowledgement. I was here, and I had every right to be. I sat in the chair by the window, directly across from Vivian. My hands rested on my lap, gently clasped. I wasn't here to fight. I just wanted to know what my mother truly wanted. I hadn't even settled into the wooden chair by the window when the sharp click of high heels echoed from the backyard. Elise stepped in to inform me that everyone had gathered outside for the will reading. Of course. Vivian's signature style. White chairs, a long table, pale blue striped linens under blooming trellises. I followed the hallway out to the patio. The air was thick with jasmine and dried orange peel. Guests in expensive summer outfits murmured in soft conversations, sparkling mimosa glasses in hand. As I stepped down the stone steps, an odd hush rippled across the space. Vivian stood at the head of the long table, right beside her husband, Warren, the man who had never strayed from his role as background furniture at every family event. He didn't speak, didn't act, just nodded on cue and stood exactly where he was supposed to. I took the empty chair near the far end of the table, seated between two distant aunts I only ever saw at Christmas. No one greeted me. Vivian's voice rang out, as syrupy as it was laced with venom. "Oh, Melanie, I thought you'd forgotten the way home." A few guests chuckled weakly, the sound brittle like glassware hitting porcelain. I pressed my lips together, saying nothing. But Vivian wasn't finished. She looked around, raising her voice like she was making a toast. Mom always wished to have all her children present for important moments, even the ones who only show up once in a while. More nervous laughter followed, mixed with side glances aimed at me from up and down the table. I tightened my hand on my lap and reminded myself, don't react. Don't give her what she's fishing for. Just then, Attorney Monroe emerged from the glass doors at the back of the house, holding a brown leather folder. He was in his 60s, silver hair, upright posture, and the kind of serious face that made you sit straighter just by looking at him. Vivian moved swiftly toward him, placing a hand lightly on his arm as if they were old friends. "We truly appreciate you taking the time," she said with formal sweetness, though her eyes darted straight at me. "I'm sure everything will be cleared up now, no more confusion." I noticed her lean slightly, sliding a thin white envelope beneath the tablecloth in the direction of Uncle Eugene, Mom's youngest brother. The motion was quick, practiced, and sharp. I saw it, but no one else seemed to notice. Attorney Monroe nodded courteously and set his documents down on the table. "Before we begin reading the will," he said, "I need to confirm the presence of the primary beneficiary." He turned to me and extended a verification form. I took it carefully, glancing at the title. Verification of Identity and Participation Rights. As I reached for a pen, Uncle Eugene, the same one who had just received that envelope, spoke up. "I didn't have to sign anything last time." His voice was surprised, but there was an undertone of unease. "I'm simply following protocol," Monroe replied calmly. "There are some unique conditions this time that require additional confirmation." Vivian smiled as she poured more water into her glass. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Surprises should be tightly managed, shouldn't they, Melanie?" I signed the paper without flinching, but deep down, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't just a reading. It was a performance. One Vivian had staged, rehearsed, and designed down to the last whisper. A breeze stirred the vine-covered arch above us. I caught the look she gave Uncle Eugene, their eye contact too coordinated to be grief. It was a deal, a calculation, and I began to understand. She didn't just want me out of the room. She wanted me humiliated, undone, erased, like I had never existed in our mother's story at all. I slipped my hand into my bag, brushing against the silk handkerchief Mom had once given me. "She thinks I came here to hear my name skipped over?" I straightened my spine and locked my gaze on Vivian. She smiled back, confident, calm, like everything was already in her control. Attorney Monroe removed his glasses, pulled out a stack of documents embossed with an official seal, and turned the first page with the same silver-ringed finger that made even routine gestures feel weighty. The air under the pergola thickened immediately. Birds chirping in the distance suddenly sounded like echoes from another world. "I will now begin reading the official, notarized will dated March 7th, he said, voice deep and steady, each word dropping like a stone onto the table so carefully arranged. I kept my eyes on the tabletop, but my ears caught every shift in breath around me. "According to the final wishes of Mrs. Dorothy Harper Miller," Monroe continued, "her entire estate, real property, financial assets, personal belongings, and all residual income shall be transferred to her sole heir, Miss Melanie Harper." A wine glass clinked against a porcelain plate at the far end of the table. A soft gasp slipped from someone's throat. And then, complete silence. I stayed still, hands folded on my lap, trying to hold my composure, but inside it felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Not from joy, but disbelief. Me, the one always treated like the outsider, was the one my mother had trusted most? Vivian shot to her feet like she'd touched a live wire. "What did you just say?" Her voice cracked high and sharp. "There must be a mistake. That can't be the final version." Monroe didn't react. He simply turned the page, his tone unaffected by emotion. "I can confirm that this will was signed in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and notarized in accordance with the laws of the state of South Carolina." Vivian scoffed, but the shake in her laugh betrayed her. "No, no way. She wasn't even here when Mom was sick. I was the one taking care of everything. I'm the eldest." Aunt Margie, seated beside me, nudged my elbow and whispered, "Sweetheart, I didn't see this coming." As I said nothing, even my breathing felt like it needed to stay level. "She must have manipulated her," Vivian said, louder now, pointing directly at me. "Melanie always knows how to twist things to revolve around herself. My mother would never do that. Never." Uncle Eugene cleared his throat awkwardly, staring down at his palms like he wanted to disappear. Monroe finally looked up and spoke again. "In addition to the main content, Mrs. Dorothy also left a personal letter addressed to Miss Melanie. I'll provide that at the end of today's session." Vivian couldn't sit still. She lunged forward toward Monroe, but Warren gently caught her by the arm. "Just breathe," he whispered firmly. "I have the right to know everything in that will," Vivian shouted. "I organized the funeral. I handled the banking. For the record," Monroe cut in, his voice lower now, "those arrangements were made contrary to Mrs. Dorothy's wishes. In the handwritten letter, she cited that interference as one of the key reasons she felt compelled to revise the will entirely." Vivian froze. Her cheeks flushed deep red, her lips trembled, but no words came out. For the first time that morning, I raised my head and looked her straight in the eyes. She no longer looked like the woman who ran the room, no longer the sister who always got the spotlight. She looked like someone flailing in a house she believed was hers. Every pair of eyes in the garden turned toward her. "This is a setup, a complete scam. I won't let this go," Vivian choked out. "I'm going to sue." "You're entirely within your rights to do so," Monroe replied calmly. "But I assure you, all documentation has been thoroughly verified." I looked around. The same relatives who only remembered my name when it was time to send Christmas cards now said nothing. No one laughed, no one defended her. Even Warren didn't meet her gaze. I said nothing. I didn't need to, because at that moment I understood that words had lost their power when the truth stood tall in the form of signatures, seals, and a mother's final trust. And the only thing Vivian had left was panic. Mr. Monroe paused after announcing that I was the sole heir. He looked over his horn-rimmed glasses, letting his gaze sweep across the table, as if making sure everyone was still paying attention. The patio remained still, except for the soft clink of silverware against porcelain, like someone had just dropped their composure. "However," he said, voice lowering, "there is an important additional clause that Mrs. Dorothy personally instructed me to include in the official will." I held my breath. Vivian snapped her head up, a strange flicker of hope flashing in her eyes. "The inheritance," Monroe continued, "will only be fully transferred if Ms. Melanie Harper resides in the main house for a minimum of 1 year from the effective date of this will. During that time, the property may not be sold, rented, renovated, or transferred in any form." I clenched my hands in my lap. That condition. Mom had never mentioned it, but thinking back to our last phone calls, the scattered questions like, "Do you get cold in the west bedroom?" I realized she had been planning this all along. Monroe paused, then turned his gaze directly to Vivian. "Additionally," he said, Mrs. Dorothy explicitly stated that Miss Vivian Harper shall not make any financial, structural, or administrative changes related to the house, garden, or any property within the estate grounds for 1 year from the date this will is made public. The words hit like a stone dropped into what had seemed like a calm lake. The silence that followed was no longer awkward, it was tense, as if something had just cracked beneath the surface. What? Vivian jumped up again. No interference allowed? I'm the one who's been living here. I've managed the house for 2 years while she stayed away, completely uninterested. Not accurate, Monroe replied, resting a hand on the folder. According to notes left by Mrs. Dorothy, you moved back into the house without invitation and, during that time, carried out several controversial actions, including hiring an architect and proposing to turn the pool area into a private event venue without her consent. Vivian's face drained of color. Warren, her husband, looked down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. She was sick. In and out of clarity, no one can truly believe she knew what she was doing. A soft cough came from the far end of the table. Dr. Eleanor, the physician who had treated my mother at home during her final months, spoke calmly. I'm sorry, but according to the medical records I submitted, Dorothy was fully lucid throughout the will revision process. I was also one of the 2 witnesses present during her signing. Vivian looked as if the breath had been knocked from her chest. She looked around desperately, searching for a nod, a supportive glance. There was none. I will appeal. I'll overturn all of this. It's offensive. She spat the words through clenched teeth, then dropped back into her seat, eyes burning red. I raised my head toward Mr. Monroe. This condition, it takes effect immediately? I asked, voice steady despite the quickening in my chest. Yes, he said. You'll receive the official copy of the will and related management documents within 48 hours. If you agree to the terms outlined, the inheritance will be finalized after 1 year from today. I nodded, though countless questions still lingered inside me. 1 year in the place that used to be home. Now equal parts memory and scar. 1 year under the same roof as echoes that weren't always kind, and worst of all, 1 year with a sister willing to do anything to flip the board back in her favor. The late spring breeze gently swept through the rows of flax plants behind the garden. The leaves stirred slightly, as if whispering secrets only the quiet could understand. I hadn't moved from my chair. The dizziness after everything Mr. Monroe had read faded quicker than I expected. Part of me knew this wasn't the end. When Mr. Monroe pulled an ivory envelope from his folder, sealed carefully, I already knew what it was. This is a handwritten letter Mrs. Dorothy left for Miss Melanie, he said, handing the envelope over with both hands. Signed, dated, and witnessed independently. You may keep it private, but if you'd like to share, we're ready to listen. I stared at the handwriting on the front. To Melanie, my daughter. The script still tilted slightly, soft and graceful, but something about it felt firmer, more certain than in years past. I opened the letter, my hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but because, deep down, I had never truly believed Mom was ever on my side. I took a deep breath and began to read, softly, but loud enough that everyone around the table held their breath. Melanie, if you're holding this letter, it means I'm no longer here to explain things, and I'm sorry for leaving you alone for so long. There were years I let you fend for yourself in this family's empty spaces. When you moved away, I didn't stop you. When you stayed silent, I didn't ask why. But I watched. When you sent flowers for your sister's wedding, when you quietly paid my first month of hospital bills, I knew. And I never forgot. I paused. Across the table, Vivian was gripping her glass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Leslie continued. Vivian once told me this house was a waste, that selling it could fund a new future, clear away everything old. I refused. But while I was being treated for pneumonia, she went behind my back. contacted a realtor, even brought in photographers to stage the interiors. Melanie, you were the only one who ever asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should do, and I rewrote everything the day you sat beside me, held my hand, and said nothing. I didn't change my will out of anger. I did it because I wanted someone patient enough to preserve this home, even just for 1 year, and I knew you were the only one who could. I clenched the letter. The garden was silent. Even the birds had stopped singing. Vivian stood up for the third time. Lies, she shouted. That letter proves nothing. Mom was sick. She wasn't in her right mind. She was lucid enough to keep every recording and signature, Mr. Monroe replied calmly, and sharp enough to change the front door lock right after you brought an appraisal team here without her permission. Vivian's eyes widened. She turned to her husband. Say something! You were there that day. Warren hunched his shoulders, saying nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the rug beneath the patio, a silent but unmistakable denial. I folded the letter and laid it on the table. This isn't about winning, it's about what Mom truly wanted, I said quietly, and what she feared most was being erased while still alive. Vivian gasped for breath, her face red and trembling. I won't let you slander me, she screamed, her voice cracking with rage. I'll take this to court. You think reading a letter will make everyone believe you? I looked her dead in the eyes, unblinking. I don't need everyone to believe me, I said. I have enough proof of what Mom wanted, and I'll defend it until no one dares twist the truth again. A strong gust of wind swept through, carrying a few orange blossom petals across the tiles. In the dappled shadow and light, I felt something I hadn't believed I'd feel again in years. Trust. Less than a week after the will reading, I found a thick, dark brown envelope quietly sitting in my mailbox. My name was printed clearly at the top, Melanie Harper. At the bottom, a cold line of text. Summons, Charleston County Superior Court. I held the envelope in my hand, a familiar sting hitting me like a slap from behind. I didn't even need to open it. I already knew. Vivian had followed through on her threat. But this time, she didn't scream. She didn't shout in the garden anymore. She chose the method people like Vivian use when they lose control, a countersuit. In her filing to the court, Vivian accused me of emotionally manipulating a weakened patient, coercing my mother into changing her will under ambiguous emotional influence. Her attorney stated clearly that my mother no longer possessed full legal capacity at the time of signing. In other words, she accused me of manipulating a dying woman to steal her estate. I sat still in my office, the opened envelope on the desk, my fingers running over each dry line of legal jargon, but my mind could barely process it. All the memories, those nights I placed cold towels on Mom's fevered forehead, the times I stayed awake beside her hospital bed, those bowls of lukewarm porridge she barely managed to sip, were now being rewritten into a whole different story, a calculated scheme. But I had prepared for this possibility, not because I'd predicted Vivian would sue, but because Mom had left behind every trace, as if she knew this would happen. I reached into the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet and pulled out a small aluminum box, the one I had hidden since the day I returned to Charleston. Inside was a meticulously organized set of documents. On each one, Mom had written in her handwriting, "For Melanie to use if needed." I opened them. A certified copy of her medical evaluation from her primary doctor, stating, "Patient is lucid, responsive, and capable of making personal decisions." An email she sent to Mr. Monroe titled, "Revised Will, My Final Intention," in which she wrote, "I want Melanie to be the heir because she values this house, not because she's trying to sell it like Vivian attempted." A series of phone call recordings saved through an automatic app on Mom's phone. In one clip, Vivian can be heard yelling, "If you don't sign, then don't expect anyone to be on your side later." But the strongest piece of evidence was on a small USB drive hidden inside the lining of my handbag. A video testimony from the night nurse, Denise Caldwell, who had cared for my mother during her final days. In the clip, filmed on a phone, Denise sits calmly in front of the camera, barefaced and composed. I saw no signs of coercion. In fact, she personally requested I record her mental state on the day she signed the updated will. She also confided in me that her eldest daughter was secretly contacting real estate agents behind her back. I sent all the documents to my personal attorney, Teresa Lachton, a sharp woman in her 50s, known for never smiling unless necessary. After reviewing the evidence, she said just one sentence. "We're not just defending, we're going on the offensive." 4 days later, I stood beside Teresa at the courthouse office to file our motion to dismiss Vivian's accusations of psychological abuse of a vulnerable adult. I wasn't trying to humiliate my sister, but I also wouldn't let Mom be reduced to a confused old woman just to serve someone else's ambition. As we exited the filing office, I spotted Vivian standing in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes full of contempt. "You make me sick," she hissed through her teeth. "Always pretending to be the good one, but you're just a snake." I looked her straight in the eyes, unflinching. "I don't have to pretend anymore," I said, "because this time, Mom didn't leave me to fight alone." Vivian scoffed and turned sharply, her carefully curled hair bouncing with each step, but I saw something she couldn't hide. A small, growing fear behind her eyes with every piece of evidence I brought forward. The courtroom was packed that morning, from my mom's old friends and a few neighbors who used to bring her pear cobbler in the fall, to distant relatives I'd never even heard of. They were all there. News of the countersuit had spread like a summer breeze through Charleston. Sister Sue's younger sister over late mother's will. On the plaintiff's bench, Vivian wore a navy purple suit, her hair in a tight bun, makeup flawless like she was judging a cooking competition. She looked composed, but her knee twitched under the table. Beside me, attorney Teresa Lawton opened her document bag, pulled out a small silver USB, and placed it gently on the table before the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice sharp as a razor, "my client wishes to submit a video recorded and authenticated 3 weeks before Mrs. Dorothy Miller passed. The video was filmed by the head nurse at her hospice facility with full consent from the patient to ensure transparency in all legal decisions." Judge Jackson, a man in his 60s with eyes that never scanned a room twice, gave a small nod. "Play the recording." The courtroom fell into a breathless hush. Even the sound seemed to sink into the thick carpet. The screen above us lit up. The video revealed a simple room, white curtains fluttering in the breeze. On the bed was my mother, Dorothy. Harper Miller. Frailer than before, her skin pale, but her eyes unmistakably alert. Her gray hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a cream sweater I remembered hand-washing for her during my visit in early spring. She looked straight into the camera, then offered a faint smile. "I'm Dorothy Harper Miller," her voice steady, not wavering. "Today's February 10th. I asked Nurse Caldwell to record this so that there's no doubt when I'm no longer here." Vivian leaned forward, panic flashing in her eyes. Her mom continued, "I amended my will because my eldest daughter, Vivian Harper, tried to sell the house while I was in the hospital without consulting me. I found out when an architect showed up to measure the backyard. She said she was invited by Vivian to discuss converting the property into 3 luxury villas. I never agreed to that." A murmur rippled through the back rows. "I refused to sign any transfer papers, but later discovered a contract was sent to my attorney's office with a forged signature. I can't prove who did it, but I suspect Vivian." Vivian jolted in her seat. My mom took a deep breath, her thin hands gripping the edge of the blanket. "Melanie, my younger daughter was the only one who asked me what I wanted, not what I should do. She didn't pressure me, she didn't beg. She just sat there and listened to me breathe. I rewrote my will, voluntarily. I was fully lucid when I made that decision. And if anyone doubts it, please ask my head nurse, my attending physician, and my legal advisor. I signed it in their presence. No one forced me. I did it to protect this home from those who see it as an investment, and to let Melanie know I always saw her, even when I didn't say it out loud." The screen faded to black. No one moved. A few elderly folks in the back wiped their eyes silently. Judge Jackson adjusted his glasses and turned to the plaintiff. "Miss Harper, do you have a response?" Vivian shot to her feet, hastily gathering her papers like she was trying to collect her composure. "It's that video. It doesn't prove anything," she said, struggling to keep her voice even. But her tone cracked. My mother was under medication at the time. She wasn't thinking clearly. Everyone knows patients near the end become confused. You can't trust what they say. Attorney Teresa calmly stepped to the podium, lifting 2 sealed medical reports. "The first," she said, holding it up, "is from Dr. James Klein, her attending physician, confirming full cognitive function on the day the video was recorded. The second is a statement from Nurse Caldwell. Patient initiated the recording and showed no signs of confusion or delusion." Vivian had no reply. Her hands began to shake. She looked around the room, searching for support, but no one met her eyes, not even Warren, her husband, who quietly turned away. And then, for the first time since the trial began, Vivian collapsed into her seat. Her shoulders slumped, as if the air had been sucked out of her. No more anger, no more shouting, just silence. The kind no one wanted to disturb. I remained still, not saying a word, because I didn't have to. This time, my mother had spoken for me, in court, before those who once doubted me, believing I was just a greedy heir. And with her final words, she shattered every last illusion. Judge Jackson's gavel struck the bench with a sharp crack, slicing through the thick tension hanging in the courtroom. Having reviewed all submitted documents, accompanying evidence, the video recorded at the request of Mrs. Dorothy Harper Miller, and the relevant legal confirmations, he said, his voice steady, not cold, the court declares the will signed on February 10th to be valid and legally binding. I heard every word clearly, even though my ears rang for a moment. I didn't move, not from shock, but from something else, relief. The judge turned toward Vivian, still slumped in her seat like all the air had been drained from her. "Any further appeals must follow the appropriate review procedure. But be advised, unless new, compelling evidence is introduced, any effort to overturn this ruling will be dismissed outright." Vivian didn't respond. Attorney Teresa gave my shoulder a light tap, signaling it was time to rise. I nodded, picked up my bag, and walked slowly out of the row. I didn't glance around. I wasn't looking for anyone's eyes. But I still saw them. Warren, Vivian's husband, stood leaning against the far wall, his expression hollow as he looked at her. Uncle Eugene bowed his head, avoiding mine. A distant cousin gave me a small nod as I passed. Not approval, not disapproval, just acknowledgement. As I neared the plaintiff's table, Vivian suddenly looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, mascara faintly smeared, but not a single real tear fell. "You really think you won?" she muttered, low enough for only me to hear. "You didn't win, you just acted better." I paused, turned, locking eyes with her. "I wasn't acting," I said, not lowering my voice. "I was living. You're the one who's been acting, in a house our mother never invited you into." I didn't wait to see her reaction. I walked away. The midday sun struck my face as I opened the courthouse door. The air outside felt lighter. The press crowd in the corridor looked drained from waiting. A few raised cameras when they spotted me, but there were no shouts, no pushing. A young reporter, petite and bright-eyed, stepped closer. "Miss Harper," she asked, "do you feel satisfied? Having just won against your own sister?" I looked at her for a moment, then shook my head. "This isn't a win. This is protection," I said. "I didn't take anything from anyone. I simply stood by the only person who ever stood by me." And I walked away. No justifications, no clarifications. Behind me, the courtroom door closed. I didn't need to turn around to know Vivian was still sitting there, alone, in a room full of people who no longer stood with her. That afternoon, I returned to my mother's old house. On the wooden coffee table, I placed the certified copy of the court-approved will on the bookshelf, right next to a photo of my mom smiling in her lavender garden. I didn't open a bottle of wine. I didn't call anyone to celebrate. I simply sat in the old armchair, my mother's favorite for late-night reading, and let the quiet settle around me. Not because I was alone, but because at last I had come home, not as the forgotten daughter, but as the one chosen. Not because I was the most successful, but because my mother knew I wouldn't sell this house. I wouldn't bulldoze her memories. I wouldn't use her death as a tool to control others. I didn't need anyone to validate that with applause. The proof was in the silence that filled the room, the moment truth finally spoke. From someone once treated like a shadow in her own family, Melanie stood up to defend the truth, her mother's honor, and the memories that mattered most. She didn't fight back with anger, but with faith, evidence, and unwavering resolve. Melanie's story reminds us justice doesn't have to be loud, and real love always leaves a trace, even after someone is gone. In a world full of deception, honesty and loyalty can still make the truth heard. What do you think about Melanie's choices and how she protected her mother's legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and the ties that shape our lives.